Hey everyone, this is Pastor Mike, and I'm back with another one of our videos on Wednesday. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm really kind of bummed that we're doing this one because it's the Wednesday before Easter, and that means that we're not going to be able to be together for Easter. And I was really hoping when we started these that we were going to be able to come back together by now, but it doesn't look like we're going to be able to anytime soon. So it's my hope and my prayer that as we are apart, that the desire to come together will just continue to grow, and so that when we do finally get to come together again, there will just be so much joy during that time. And there's probably an application there about longing for the return of Christ, but we're just going to leave that one there and move on. That's another video for another day. Today, I want to talk about a passage from the Gospel of Matthew. So go ahead and grab your Bible and turn to Matthew chapter 27. You might have to flip a page because we're going to start in verse 62 at the very end. So I'll give you a second to get there. If you need to pause me, go ahead and just get to that passage. Grab your family if you're around. Watch this together. I just encourage you to do that and then talk about it at the end. But in Matthew chapter 27, starting in verse 62, says, "The next day, the one after preparation day, the chief priests and the Pharisees went to Pilate. 'Sir,' they said, 'we remember that while he was still alive, that deceiver said,'" and that deceiver is referring to Jesus, "that deceiver said, 'After 3 days I will rise again.' So give the order for the tomb to be made secure until the 3rd day. Otherwise his disciples may come and steal the body and tell the people that he has been raised from the dead. This last deception will be worse than the first." "Take a guard," Pilate answered. "Go and make the tomb as secure as you know how." So they went and they made the tomb secure by putting a seal on the stone and posting a guard. Now I want to focus specifically on verses 65 and 66, the response of Pilate to this request. And the Pharisees and the chief priests have been the fiercest enemies of Jesus. And they should have been rejoicing at this time. They should be happy that Jesus was finally dead. He was gone, and they didn't have to worry about him. His followers are mourning, scattered. They're afraid. They're hiding. Their world had ended, or so they thought it had ended. And they didn't have faith that Jesus was going to rise from the dead. They just simply didn't believe that it was going to happen. And they seem to have forgotten his words. You know, for at least the last 2 years, Jesus had been dropping hints and on some occasions blatantly telling them that he was going to rise again on the 3rd day. The Pharisees knew this, so his followers should have known it. And yet his followers seem to have forgotten this. They've gone into hiding. They're afraid. They're mourning. But the chief priests and the other religious leaders, they didn't forget this. They remembered quite vividly that Jesus said that he was going to rise again. And they were going to do all that they could to ensure that that didn't happen. They weren't going to let the disciples come and try and steal the body and make that claim. But I also can't help but think that some of them feared that he really was going to rise from the dead. And they thought that if they put this stone there and the guard there, that they would be able to stop this in somehow. It's a ridiculous thought, but it falls in line with their opposition to Jesus. So I can't help but think that that was kind of in the back of their mind. So they come to Pilate and they ask for permission and aid. They want to secure this tomb. They didn't want any funny business to happen. They probably thought that they would be able to breathe easily once this was all over, once they got past this 3rd day. And after that 3rd day was complete, then they could celebrate. And they were correct. There would be celebration on the 3rd day, but it wasn't them who was celebrating. But I just love the response that Pilate gives here. He says, "Take a guard. You have access to soldiers. Take them. Make the tomb as secure as you know how. As secure as you possibly can. You can have what you want. You can continue to oppose this man long after he is dead." And they did. So they took a guard and they put a seal on the stone. Now we're not talking about like they sealed the stone like you're sealing a Tupperware by pushing the lid down on it. That's not what's going on here. Where it was like a seal, like on an envelope, a royal seal. And this one particular is the Roman seal, which would tell anyone who comes upon it that you can't go in here. You can't mess around with this tomb, or you will face the punishment of the Roman government. And you'd probably be arrested and maybe even killed if you messed around with whoever was buried in this tomb. So the Pharisees and the chief priests, they had the government behind them. And not only that, they left soldiers there. So to protect this tomb, they have soldiers. They have a huge rock, a heavy rock that, a normal person probably couldn't move on their own, and the seal of the Roman government. So anyone who goes near it would know, don't mess with this tomb. They have this secure as they possibly can. But we know that they failed. I'm standing here doing this video because they failed. Jesus came out of that tomb. Jesus rose from the dead. And Jesus conquered death itself. No stone, no steel, no guard could keep him in that tomb. He has risen. My family has always done Easter big. We've had a big Easter meal. For as long as I can remember, we wore our best clothes, and oftentimes we wore a brand new outfit just for Easter. It was family picture day. It was just this big deal. My family growing up always made a big deal about Easter. And Courtney and I are trying to pass that on to Brad and Zeke. Every weekday this week, we've talked to Brad and Zeke about Easter, and it brings me so much joy to hear Brad and to hear Zeke echoing him and his answers. And to have them tell us that we celebrate Easter because Jesus rose. But it also makes me laugh because somehow Brad has got it in his mind that when Jesus rose, and I'm using Brad's word here, he was ginormous. Now, I don't know exactly how Brad has come up with this idea that Jesus was physically larger than a normal human being after he rose from the grave. I don't understand why. I don't know if he saw a picture with it that way, or if we've just made such a big deal out of it that Jesus rose, that he has made this association, but it's lodged in his mind that Jesus came back physically huge. And while that's not the case, when Jesus rose from the dead, he was, a normal-sized human being, as far as we know. His power, his impact on the world was ginormous. His majesty, his glory, his authority was unstoppable. The seal meant nothing. The stone was nothing. The guards who were standing there were insignificant compared to the risen Lord. The religious leaders thought that they had stopped Jesus, but what they had really done was ensure that the resurrection of Jesus could not be doubted. It could not be disproved. By doing all that they could to stop his resurrection, they made it impossible for them to deny it. I mean, they still tried to deny it because that's what they did, but there was no legitimacy to their denial. Had they left the tomb alone, had it been found empty and they weren't anywhere near it, they didn't set up these precautions, they could have said, oh, the disciples just stole it, or oh, someone else took the body. But their desire to prevent this very thing made them witnesses to the power and might of God. The resurrection is now undeniable. And the fact that the religious leaders, with the backing of Rome, secured this tomb and then were unable to produce a body when claims of resurrection began, they vindicated the claims of Christ. In their efforts to stop Christ, they became tools in the spread of the gospel. And I've just found so much encouragement in this text this week. For all the plans and the power of men, God cannot be stopped. The grave could not hold him. Satan was defeated. Sin and death have no power over us now. As I was writing this, I got to this point right here where we are, and I began to write, we are living in a time of uncertainty. And that's true. With everything that's going on with this virus, there are a lot of things that are uncertain. Many of us are laid off. Many of us are worried about getting sick or loved ones getting sick. And some of us might just be feeling depressed or overwhelmed over this prolonged isolation. We are in the middle of a crisis. But you know what? All times are times of uncertainty. None of us knows the future. None of us are promised tomorrow. None of us are even promised the next 10 seconds. Every moment we get is a gift from God. Every moment we spend on this earth is God showing us grace, because it is only through the power of God that this world stays together. He is the creator and sustainer of everyone and everything. He holds the world in the palm of his hands. As Pastor Paul said in the first video several weeks ago, we weigh bananas, God weighs mountains. The power of God is so far beyond anything we can comprehend. The Pharisees did what they could to try and stop the resurrection of Christ, and they failed miserably. They weren't even close. There was no contest. And remember, these aren't dumb men. They weren't, the average, ordinary guys. They were the brightest. They were the most well-educated. They knew the scriptures, but they were not only the religious leaders, but they were the political leaders. These men were the ones who put their minds together, and they couldn't slow Christ down as he left the grave. The power of Christ should give us so much confidence in uncertainty. We will never know what the future is going to hold, but we can always trust in him. We can follow what he has revealed to us. We can obey, and we can seek after him. And so in closing, I just want to encourage you, especially if you're watching this as a family, to talk about these things that you are concerned about. Talk about them and consider how you can trust God with those things. Proverbs 12:25 says, "Anxiety weighs down the heart, but a kind word cheers it up." Share with one another, encourage one another, support one another, and above all, focus on Christ. Remember his power, his authority, and his promises to his people. He will come again. Long for his return, when all will be set right. We'll see you next time.